Tonight, we report on a mystery that started in the waters off the Bahamas involving dead whales. A mystery that found its way to the Pentagon and our national security correspondent, David Martin.
Chances are you've never heard of beaked whales. If you saw one, you could easily mistake it for an oversized dolphin. But you'll probably never get the chance because they're shy and reclusive creatures, one of the most mysterious of all marine mammals. So it was more than just a little strange when beaked whales suddenly started coming ashore in the Bahamas. Who killed the whales? Some marine biologists blamed the mass stranding not on some natural phenomenon, but on the U.S. Navy. At first, the Navy said no way, but that was before the evidence started piling up.
Something happened. Something big happened.
Marine biologist Ken Balcom got the first distress call here at the beach in front of his house on the Bahamian island of Abaco.
He said, "Ken, come quick, there's a whale right out front." And literally right here in front of the house was a goosebeak whale swimming face in right toward the sand, looking as though it was going to head up the beach. It was just like totally crazy.
Kenny's trying to turn it around.
While friends videotaped the entire event, Balcom managed to push the 2-ton creature back toward deep water. But his work that morning was just beginning.
As we were doing that, we heard from neighbors that there's another whale stranded down about a mile from here.
So you have to be really distressed really hard.
As we were going to that second whale, our neighbors came along with a third whale that was just north of us.
Okay.
Setting out by seaplane, Balcom searched the surrounding beaches. All told, he found 15 whales. 8 of them died.
I was devastated. We don't see 15 of these whales in a day, much less on the beach.
The strandings were so extraordinary, Dr. Darlene Kenton, one of the world's top experts on the anatomy of whales, flew in from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts.
This tissue is a lot bloodier than I would expect.
She performed a beachfront autopsy and came up with the first clue as to what might have happened.
I saw bleeding into the inner ears. I saw some hemorrhages in some of the tissues that are pressure sensitive, that are sound sensitive. We're now looking at the back of the animal's head.
Using CAT scans to create 3D images of the whale's head, Kenton found damage in the tissues around the ear.
There's a hemorrhage that leads down along the internal ear canal.
Kenton thinks a pressure wave, something akin to an underwater sonic boom, injured the whale's ears, disorienting them, driving them to shallow water, and even up onto the beach. But what could have done that? It was a complete mystery until Balcom spotted a suspect. Out searching for more stranded whales, he videotaped Navy ships operating in the same waters the whales had fled.
Oh, I believe the Navy did it.
Balcom had spent 5 years in the Navy tracking Soviet submarines and believed the whales were hit by sonar. Not this sonar, which simply listens for the sound of any subs lurking nearby, but this. A sonar which sends out an ear-splitting screech that travels through the water as a pressure wave until it bounces off a submarine or some other underwater object.
What exactly is it that sonar can do to marine mammals?
Sonar sends out a pulse of acoustic energy. If that acoustic energy is intense enough, as the newer, more powerful sonars are, in the case of a whale, for example, it'll hit the lungs and the sinuses around the ear and any place where there's a gas or air.
So it punches the animal.
Yeah, it's a bruise, a very intense pressure trauma.
But it would be a long time before the Navy could bring itself to admit its ships, much less its sonar, had been anywhere near those whales in the Bahamas. 5 weeks after the strandings, the Navy issued a press release announcing it was aiding scientists in the search for a cause.
Buried in the middle of the press release was the fact that 7 ships and 3 submarines had passed through the New Providence Channel out there on the same day the whales came ashore here. Some of those ships were using their sonars in an anti-submarine warfare exercise.
The Navy was trying to soft pedal its involvement, but at the Pentagon, Robert Peary, the official in charge of making sure the fleet does not damage the environment, knew from the start it was big news.
What was your first reaction when you
heard about these strandings?
Oh my God, this is serious business.
Peary is the Undersecretary of the Navy, the man in charge of finding out exactly what happened. How long did that exercise last?
The transit of the destroyers through the channel lasted the
Best part of the day. And are they using their sonars most of that time?
Yes, they are.
That's an awful lot of sound in the water.
That's true.
The Navy's own investigation shows that within hours the whales started coming up on the beach. But for Peary, that still doesn't prove sonar caused the strandings.
We don't know that it was the sound emitted by these ships that caused the trauma.
What other sounds could have caused that?
Other kinds of sounds that can cause such trauma in the ear of these things is explosions underwater, underwater seismic events, things of that kind.
But there's no record.
No, we have not located any such a thing going on in that channel.
So the only unusual sound in that water that day was the
Our sonars. That's correct.
It's pretty suggestive.
Yes, it is.
It's not the first time beaked whales have stranded after a sonar exercise. 4 years ago, it happened in Greece. 12 beaked whales came ashore just after NATO ships began testing a new long-range sonar. Scientists failed to preserve the forensic evidence, so the link to sonar was never proved. Still, the Greek strandings remain a troubling coincidence.
It involved a different kind of sonar, but the beaked whales seem to be particularly sensitive creatures.
Sensitive creatures that are believed to have been on the planet for 20 million years. One of the deepest diving of all marine mammals, beaked whales can stay under for an hour and dive up to 1 mile deep. At those depths, where there is no sunlight, the ears are all important, since the whales must rely on sound for their sense of direction. They shy away from people and prefer to live in underwater canyons, which may explain why they could have been so disoriented by the Navy's sonar.
It's like being, if you were rafting down the Grand Canyon and somebody dropped a bomb in there, you'd probably have people climbing up the walls to get out of there. The sounds echoing back and forth. It's just a heck of a place to be when you're a very sensitive listening animal.
The fact that beaked whales inhabit the deepwater canyon called the New Providence Channel in the Bahamas is, according to Ken Balcom, well known.
This was no secret that there are beaked whales living in this canyon. We've made that well known to the Navy, and it may take a while to get to the top, but their guys knew about it. They can't deny that they knew that they're here.
Somebody someplace in the Navy knew.
Somebody someplace in the Navy knew. A lot of somebodies knew.
Did you know there were beaked whales in that channel?
No, unfortunately, that was one of the things that we were not really aware of.
Now, why not? I mean, the Navy bills itself as the leading researcher of the effects of sound on marine mammals, and every scientist who studies marine mammals knows that beaked whales are in that channel. Why didn't the Navy know?
In this case, we hadn't been through that channel in some time. We could probably have learned that there was a concentration of beaked whales there, but we had no prior reason to look into that or to be concerned about it.
The Navy is plenty concerned about those beaked whales now. The evidence that could prove its sonar caused the strandings is sitting in a pair of jars in Darlene Ketten's lab at Woods Hole, the ear bones from one of the dead whales.
We'll look for damage in the inner ear to see if it gives us any footprint of the type of pressure that could have damaged them.
But the delicate tissues of the inner ear are surrounded by a rock-hard bone that first must be dissolved, a process that will take months. Even then, the final pieces of the puzzle may not fall into place.
I can't guarantee the results. I won't know what that ear still has to tell me until I get in there.
So for the time being, the Navy can insist there is no physical evidence tying it directly to the strandings, but the circumstantial evidence is piling up. As one admiral put it, it may not be a smoking gun, but it sure is getting hot. And there's much more at stake here than just the Navy's public image. If it can be proved sonar caused those strandings, the Navy will have to change the way it operates.
That is affirmative. Datum established. Time 1050 Zulu.
So meet the new Navy, showing us just how whale-friendly it can be when last August it conducted the first large-scale anti-submarine exercise since the strandings.
There is concern for the environment. There's concern for the whales and turtles. and we'll try to accommodate that through the entire exercise.
Rear Admiral James MacArthur is leading the Harry S. Truman Battle Group through a narrow channel off Puerto Rico. And if a whale shows up in the middle of the exercise, end of exercise.
Well, it depends. We have an exclusion zone around the ships established. If a whale is going to penetrate this exclusion zone, then we'll deviate from the plan to accommodate them, yes.
Delta Sector Center 100.
So instead of sneaking through under the cover of darkness, the exercise doesn't begin until first light, when shipboard lookouts and helicopters circling overhead have a better chance of spotting any whales. MacArthur says his battle group will get all the training it needs. Still, the thought that a few whales could slow down the U.S. Navy is hard for an admiral to swallow.
There is, some hesitation initially, and that's only initially, because the concern is that it dilutes the training. It takes away from our warfighting capabilities.
Do you think really that the most powerful Navy in the world should spend a lot of time worrying about whales?
The fact is we live in a world that is becoming very, very heavily populated, where there's tremendous pressure on a number of species, the other things that inhabit the world with us, and we have to be sensitive to that.
But finding a way to live with marine mammals does not mean the Navy is about to give up its sonar. The Navy insists sonar is mostly harmless, even though it knows there's no other explanation for what happened to those whales. There's still no prohibition on the use of sonar around whales, but it will be a long time, if ever, before the Navy conducts another anti-submarine exercise in the New Providence Channel.
The whales are not the enemy, and it's not really fair to have them suffer the collateral damage, certainly not in an exercise kind of situation. Maybe in an operational warfare scenario, whales are going to die, but not for practice. They're totally innocent of the whole thing.
Go, baby, go.
CBS Market Watch Update, sponsored by Fidelity Investments.
Mystery on the high seas. Whales around the world are turning up dead.
It was horrible seeing the way this animal actually died.
Marine scientists are searching for answers.
I just put two and two together, and we had the culprit.
Plus, the science of baseball.
Say Albert Einstein were around today, he could not calculate how a baseball occurs.
Listen to some of the biggest names in the game, and you'll never watch baseball the same way again. And later, a feast fit for a king. An exciting new branch of science serves up an ancient dish.
And it tasted heavenly.
Coming up in this edition of Science Times. This is Science Times by the New York Times. For 10 years, a team of marine biologists has been studying a rare group of whales in the Bahamas.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
Look at that. Oh, beautiful.
But one day, the whales began turning up dead or dying on Bahamian beaches. Why so many whales would become stranded like this, all at one time, was a mystery.
Something is going on in the water that's making these guys leave where they live and try and get away.
Solving it became a scientific detective story that brought cutting-edge forensics to the underwater world. Marine biologists are calling it the Bahamas Incident. The tropical waters of the Bahamas are visited each year by a rare and very special group of sea creatures. They look like giant dolphins, but they are whales. Beaked whales, animals so elusive that video of them is also very rare.
They're basically living dinosaurs. We're studying something that almost nobody ever heard about.
Beaked whales are not well known to most people or to biologists. Their shy nature makes them difficult to study. Sightings at sea are infrequent.
It's amazing that there are animals the size of elephants living in the ocean that we know nothing about.
There are about 20 different species of beaked whales, some only recently identified.
The most recent one was just 4 or 5 years ago. We had a brand new horse-sized animal discovered in Peru. Just amazing. It may not be a good time
to learn more about these strange creatures. Marine biologist Ken Balcom and his Bahamian wife and research partner, Diane Claridge, set up a research station on the island of Abaco. There's a deep channel just offshore here that is ideal habitat for beaked whales. These whales are deep divers. They can stay down in a lungful of air for an hour at a time.
The beaked whales selected the deep diving habitats, the benthos. There was lots of food available there, but for an air-breathing animal to get down to where the food is was a real evolutionary trick. They had to specialize air-breathing systems to keep operating when they were at extreme depths where normal air-breathing animals would be crushed.
Where are they, Sal? Where'd they go? There's Sal.
Over a decade of painstaking observation, Balcom and Claridge got to know many of the whales that come here individually.
Every species has something about it that when you see it, you can tell individuals apart.
This whale we've nicknamed Raisin Head because he's got dark clusters, or actually barnacles, stalked barnacles that attach to the teeth.
The morning of March 15th, 2000, began at their beach house research station much like any other. It turned into a day they will never forget.
I woke up in the morning, and the first thing I heard was our research assistant shouting at me, "Ken, come quick, there's a whale on the beach." So I ran out, waded out into the water, and looked it over. It was basically a good-looking young animal.
The whale was stranded right on Ken Balcom's doorstep.
So I pivoted it around, pointed it out offshore, and guided and pushed it with each raise of the swell out into deeper water.
No, don't go that way. Back up.
He kept coming back to the shore. We kept pushing him back and turning him out. And I got the feeling that he was very dizzy, disoriented.
All right, if he comes up, slap him right in the nose.
Something was, his sense of balance was messed up.
Yeah.
And as we were just getting that whale toward deep water, some fishermen came over and told us there's another whale right at a point just 200 yards away. The tide had dropped and it was already on the rocks. And you have to keep them wet to keep them alive.
When whales strand themselves on beaches and in shallow water, they're usually either injured or sick.
The reason why a sick whale will strand is that it needs to be able to breathe. If it is unable to support itself and swim at sea and stay at the surface, it'll drown.
Okay, well, you're heading for the ocean again.
But the biologists felt it unlikely that these whales were sick, because it's unusual for a disease to strike animals of several different species simultaneously. Helped by volunteers, the biologists struggled for hours to return the whales to deep water. they videotaped as they worked.
All right, okay, yeah, let go of the
Balcom
outside.
soon realized that something extraordinary was going on, as more whales kept running ashore, all in a matter of hours.
By the time we got back here, we had phone calls from Grand Bahama that there were 5 whales, at least 5 whales that stranded over there alive. And from North Eleuthera, that at least 2 whales had stranded over there alive. Whales swam in all over the Bahamas that day, and by evening there were at least 15 that I knew of.
6 of the whales were already dead when people found them.
These whales were fleeing from something. It was one of these events that is, you know, a single sort of thing that happened to all of them at once.
What was killing all the whales? The 2 scientists were determined to find out.
So the next morning on the 16th of March, a friend offered his aircraft to go do an aerial search, and I went on that while Diane took our boat and went on a vessel search in the mangrove lagoon areas that are harder to get to.
On the boat, Claridge found another whale in trouble in a lagoon. From the air, Ken Balcom spotted more of the dead animals on distant beaches. One had been savaged by sharks.
He probably cut himself coming into the beach, and that may have attracted sharks, and then once you had a feeding frenzy taking place, and it looked like there were a lot of sharks that just had to go at him. It was just horrible seeing the way this animal actually died. I mean, just to get mauled by sharks.
But as the plane crossed the deep waters of the Northwest Providence Channel, Balcom also spotted something else.
As we were crossing, we saw a destroyer, Spruance-class destroyer, steaming westward.
He videotaped several U.S. ships as the plane passed overhead.
We saw the naval ships and identified them just like we do with our whales. We know who was there. And it was, to me, that was it. We had the culprit. I just put the 2 and 2 together.
Balcom's suspicions were raised because of an event in the Mediterranean in 1996. Sonar trials by NATO off the coast of Greece were followed by a similar mass stranding of 12 beaked whales. Nothing was proved, but the incident fueled growing concerns among biologists that human activities at sea may be harming marine mammals because of the noise they generate. The undersea world is not a silent world, as it is sometimes perceived. The oceans are filled with noise from different sources. Some are natural sounds. Violent storms and the crash of lightning as it strikes the water fill the ocean with their din. Other sounds are man-made, like the drum of ships' engines and the churning of propellers. 75,000 commercial vessels navigate the world's oceans, adding to a rising chorus of man-made noise pollution. Then there are the world's navies. The ping of sonar pierces the deep whenever naval vessels engage in anti-submarine exercises. Biologists suspect that beaked whales may be particularly sensitive to these sounds.
The sensitivity of their hearing has evolved over millions of years to an exquisite fine sense.
In the deep, beaked whales navigate and hunt not by sight, but by hearing.
They don't make noise. They listen for the sounds that their prey make. And they hear squid squishing away, you know, a little hydraulic propulsion. And They catch them silently. They're very sensitive listeners, and this is one of the things that makes them susceptible to loud sounds.
But the connection between naval sonar and mass whale strandings is difficult to prove. Stranded animals are usually too badly decomposed to provide good forensic specimens. The Bahamas incident was different because of the remarkable coincidence that it happened on Ken Balcomb's doorstep. To Balcomb, it was a tragedy, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to investigate the sonar connection with fresh evidence.
The tragedy of the whales dying was one thing, but the carcasses could tell us a lot about what killed them and things about their anatomy that just were heretofore unknown.
All told, 17 whales and a dolphin stranded during the Bahamas incident. To preserve the best specimens, Balcomb severed their heads and took them to a deep freeze to be examined later. Here at last was the chance to answer a question that is giving biologists increasing concern. Is man-made noise really killing these rare creatures? And if so, how is it happening? Coming up, forensic evidence leads to a suspect. And the physics of baseball when we return. The beaches of the Bahamas became the gruesome scene of a forensic investigation.
This whole thing's kind of shifted over and down.
Expert help arrived in the person of Darlene Ketton. She's a marine mammal anatomist with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. She necropsied the animals right there on the beach.
These were an unusual species, stranding in unusual numbers. So in that sense, it's a very exciting opportunity to find out about species you just don't see otherwise. Beaked whales are extraordinarily rare. It had my interest, and all of them were valuable specimens.
Ketton has an unusual specialty.
That's the eardrum right here.
She's an expert on hearing in marine mammals, and she quickly set about retrieving the inner ear bone from the dead whales.
This tissue is a lot bloodier than I would expect.
She'd recognize right away that there's something that's a little bloodier than it should be here. You know, some enormous pressure had caused these tissues to hemorrhage.
That's how they get into the ears.
If naval sonar was the culprit, the ears might hold vital clues.
What you hear has nothing to do with the size of your ears.
The preserved heads of the best specimens were taken from the deep freeze and loaded for transport to Massachusetts. Darlene Ketton's research lab resembles a medical examiner's mortuary, except the bodies that come to the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution are not human. This dolphin, like the beaked whales from the Bahamas, died of unknown cause. There are no outward signs of injury or disease. The animal is about to undergo a CT scan.
CAT scanning is a very valuable tool. It lets us look for fractures or for hemorrhages, for gross damage internally that would be very difficult to detect on a beach dissection.
Section by section, the images reveal the presence or absence of internal damage to the animal. But just as importantly to Ketton, they also build a detailed picture of the creature's anatomy.
These are the ears right here, and this is the auditory nerve coming down.
The scanner reveals the fine inner structures of the animal's ears.
And skin's starting to fade. We're looking down the blowhole there, faded it away.
With the aid of computer software, she's able to turn the CAT scan images into three-dimensional anatomical models.
We can't understand anything about sound in the oceans and its effects until we understand what these animals hear and how they do it.
These models are yielding new insights into the mechanisms that enable marine mammals to hear in water.
The brainstem underneath. With the Bahamian case, what we did see were some hemorrhages in the scans as well as in the finer dissections that were done in the laboratory.
This is a great way to look at it. The whales that we saw that died had evidence internally of massive hemorrhage, especially in the ear and brain. You know, some enormous pressure had caused these tissues to hemorrhage. There's the hemorrhage, and it is continuous with this nerve that goes to the ear bone. So that's the evidence that Darlene Ketton has that is indicative of a pressure trauma. They were hit with sound. This was definitely one of those moments that was like, eureka, you found it. There it is, and it was laying in front of you all along. It's just that you see it for the first time.
Independently of the work at Woods Hole, Ken Balcomb pursued his own investigation at his Bahamian research station.
Ken's been totally obsessed with understanding how these whales died and you know, just trying to figure it out detail by detail exactly what happened to them.
Balcomb had served as a sonar operator during his military service, another opportune coincidence. He now spent time brushing up on his knowledge. Gradually, he began to understand just how naval sonar might have caused such catastrophic damage to these deep-diving creatures.
My explanation for the damage seen in these whales is basically that the sonar signals were resonating in the air spaces in and around the ears. And that's where all the hemorrhage was occurring.
Resonance is the force that enables sound at the right frequency to shatter glass.
And in a whale's head, if you have that resonance with that airspace, it's going to rapidly compress and decompress until the tissues around it shear, and that's lethal for the whale.
As they dive to depths that almost no other air-breathing mammal can tolerate, beaked whales equalize the pressure in their ears by pumping blood into sacs of tissue within these spaces.
When you hit it with a sound at the resonant frequency, it'll cause that sac to vibrate. And when it does, it shears the tissues around the ear and causes them to bleed. So that airspace, instead of now having air, is full of blood. So he's unable to clear his ears. Basically, it's like when you're trying to clear your ears in a dive, you end up with a terrible pain of squeeze. It's like driving a nail into the base of his head. By the time they get to the surface, they can't hear, they're dizzy, they're disoriented, hurting, and they try and get away from it. And if a shore is within range, they'll hit the beach. That's what happened to the ones we saw.
The U.S. Navy has accepted publicly that sonar may be implicated in the Bahamas strandings, but would not comment on the forensic evidence until a full report from Woods Hole is available. The National Marine Fisheries Service, the U.S. government agency which protects marine life, is also evaluating the evidence.
Starboard 108.
The Navy will have to look at all of its sonar operating procedures and have rules of deployment. You're not going to lose a war because you didn't use your weapons. But in practice situations, you don't have to go around killing everything.
In the wake of the Bahamas incident, many of the whales in Claridge and Balcomb's study group have simply disappeared.
Every time we go out, you know, especially on those calm days, we're like, well, maybe they'll show up today. And we haven't seen any of the whales that we rescued and guided back out to sea. They've either abandoned the area, those that survived, or the majority of them were actually killed in that one exercise, and there's so few of them now that our sighting rate has dropped drastically. And I feel like I have a permanent wound.
This is real. This is happening. And what are we going to do about it?
What happened to the beaked whales of the Bahamas has raised the volume of an ongoing debate in the United States about national defense versus the defense of endangered marine animals. It is spurring new efforts by scientists to assess the impact on sea creatures of a rising cacophony of man-made ocean noise. Next, take me out to the ball game, Science Time style.
It's great, Phil.
Plus, a feast fit for a king when Science Times returns. The blue whale is the largest animal on Earth and the largest member of the whale family. Which of the following is the largest member of the dolphin family?